How's everybody doing today?
Good.
Third day of Kameha.
Finally.
We're still starting a few minutes early, so anybody want to say what their favorite panel has been so far? Voice actor or experience? Anybody have a?
My favorite was The Secret History of DBZ.
Are you sure about that? It hasn't happened yet. I might let you down very spectacularly.
We came in a time machine.
Oh, that takes a lot of the pressure off. I know I did a good job.
Although to be fair, it's also multiverse theory, so maybe in that universe it was a completely different one where your panel was like way different to what it is now.
Oh no, I'm in the wrong universe.
Did our flight get delayed in that universe?
I'll get back to you on that one.
All right.
I'll check the records.
If we weren't there, then the answer is no.
All right. So I guess we can go ahead and get started with the basics. My name is MistareFusion. Actually, my name is Lance. You can call me Lance if you'd like. I have a YouTube channel. I do a series on there called Dragon Ball Dissection. Are there any Dragon Ball Dissection fans out there? Yay, awesome. I've been doing YouTube for about 9 years. I'm not exclusively Dragon Ball. I've done a lot of do like old 1940s Batman serials, and I mean like film serials, not like the kind you eat.
When's the next episode of that?
What's that?
When's the next episode of that?
It's been about 2 years since my last Batman video, so I've really been keeping people hanging on that one. I've done Star Trek, Star Wars, Power Rangers, 80s sitcoms. I love the facts of life. But I do focus mostly right now on Dragon Ball Dissection, which is an arc-by-arc analysis and review of the Dragon Ball series. I've been doing it for about 6 years now, about 75 episodes of that, so that's what I like to do around here. I've been a Dragon Ball fan for, it'll be 20 years in September. Anybody remember what big thing happened in America Dragon Ball related, September of 1998? Anybody? That was when the reruns of Dragon Ball Z first started airing on Toonami. Hey, anybody part of that late 90s Toonami crowd? Yeah. Yeah, come on in, guys. Come on in. Kameha was nice enough to make this wonderful graphic for my panel, so I thought I'd be remiss not to include it in my presentation. So it looks so pretty. And I think it was Geekdom 101's idea to add that sparking to the front of it. He loves his two-part Dragon Ball Z titles, you know? Exactly. Exciting episode title. Descriptive sentence to explain what happens in episode. All right, so you guys ready to talk Dragon Ball Z?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Okay, so the name Dragon Ball, it evokes a lot of things, and over the years there have been a lot of words or letters or descriptions attached to the end of it. You have Dragon Ball Z, your Dragon Ball GT. Come on in, guys. Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball GT, Dragon Ball Kai, Dragon Ball Super, even Dragon Ball Minus. That one makes me sad to talk about. But each of those terms designates something. We all know what it means. When you say Dragon Ball GT, that's that series that Toei made by themselves. Toriyama had some input on character designs, but it's a series they made after Toriyama stopped making the series. We know what Dragon Ball Kai means. That means it's just a re-edited version of Dragon Ball Z. Dragon Ball Super, that's, they came back a few decades later and continued on the story. And Dragon Ball Minus, that's when Toriyama decided to subtract everything interesting about Goku's backstory. Hot take.
I'm gonna silence for Bardock's character.
Oh, it doesn't do much good for Bardock's character either, no. But when you get right down to it, when you get right down to the core, I think people are pretty much in agreement that the main core of the series, of the franchise, is Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. Even if you prefer Dragon Ball Z to Dragon Ball, there's no question that this is like sort of the framework of the series, of the franchise. But what is it about this whole Z thing we have going on here? Now, I don't know if you've noticed, in the past several years there have been certain franchise movies based on books. Anybody a Harry Potter fan in the audience? Yeah, I got some Harry Potter fans. All right, so we have, the seventh book, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. when they made that book into a movie, what did they do? They split it into 2 parts. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. You see it happen with the Hunger Games. Mockingjay was split into 2 parts. You have the same thing with Twilight. Now, I'm not going to compare Dragon Ball to Twilight. I doubt I get out of this room alive if I did that. Hello, everybody. Let's wait a few seconds for everybody else to get settled in. All right, for those of you just joining us, we are talking about Dragon Ball Z. That sounds kind of obvious, but we're actually talking about the title itself. See, actually, it's funny. This is my first panel. Those of you who watch my channel know that I primarily focus on the Japanese version of things. I didn't want to alienate anybody by throwing out a whole bunch of Saiyans or Tenshihans or things like that. So I decided to focus on something a bit more production-oriented this time. That way I won't make any enemies and I'll be able to get out of this room alive. But we were talking about the fact that there have been a lot of American movies that adapt books and then split them into 2 parts. Because the fact of the matter is, is there anybody here who doesn't know that Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z are adaptations? They are TV series, but those TV series are not the original work. They are based on a manga. I'm pretty sure most of you guys know that, right? Yep. Mm-hmm. All right, guys. Toriyama, who created it, he's not a TV guy. He's not a movie guy. He is a manga artist. He draws manga for a living. But Dragon Ball Z, which is funny that it's kind of shaped that way because Dragon Ball Z is essentially Dragon Ball 2. Because in terms of the manga, here's the shocking part, there is no such thing as Dragon Ball Z. There is no Dragon Ball Z manga. That is something that the TV series did. They split Dragon Ball into 2 parts. Toriyama never wrote a manga called Dragon Ball Z. He just wrote a manga called Dragon Ball. When you have Goku as a kid in the woods, that's Dragon Ball. When you have Raditz coming and kidnapping Gohan, that's Dragon Ball. When you have Goku defeating Majin Buu, that's still called Dragon Ball. 519 chapters, nothing but Dragon Ball. But some of you might be thinking, hey, I've walked into a bookstore before. I've gone to the manga section. I know stuff. And I've seen manga that says Dragon Ball Z on it. And yes, you have. Yes, you have. It has Toriyama's name on it and all that kind of fun stuff. But the thing is, the way we receive the series here on this side of the world is a little bit different than how they got it in Japan. Because again, the TV series, they were adaptations of the mangas. People got the manga first. People who saw the TV episodes probably already knew what was going to happen because they've read the comic book series. In America, we got it quite differently. We got the television series first, and not just even that, but Funimation only dubbed the first 13 episodes of Dragon Ball initially before skipping over to Dragon Ball Z. So not only were we getting the adaptation before we were getting the original work, we were also getting basically the second 2/3 of the series before we got the first third of the series. So what happened is, once it became a hit in America, that's when Viz picked up the license to the manga. And seeing how things were in that sense, they made what you might consider a pretty smart business move. They decided to split up the manga as well. That way, they could put out both series simultaneously, and all the stuff that was popular in America right now, your Friezas and your Vegetas and things like that, they wouldn't have to wait 3 years. Well, after all that stuff wasn't even, people weren't even talking about that anymore. They can put it out right now. So in America, you had a Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z manga. Does anybody own any of the American Dragon Ball or Dragon Ball Z graphic novels? Awesome, good. You guys are good fans. Have you noticed how Dragon Ball Z Volume 1 is really, really short? Yes. Well, there's a reason for that. Back then, the whole idea of splitting the series manga-wise was such a non-issue that there wasn't even a volume split in between them. Hello! Oh, more people coming in. That's awesome. Yeah, it was such a non-issue that it wasn't even in the middle, it wasn't even in between volumes. The first 2 chapters of Dragon Ball Volume 17 are still Goku and Piccolo fighting at the tournament. And it's not until the 3rd chapter that Raditz shows up. So what Viz had to do was just chop off those first 2 chapters and put out this teeny tiny 10-chapter volume of Dragon Ball Z1, and then 6 years later, once they'd gotten to the end of Dragon Ball, they added those chapters back into the into Volume 16, which is why Volume 16 is much longer than most volumes. So, we know all that now, but that doesn't really explain why. People have a lot of sort of generalizations about Dragon Ball versus Dragon Ball Z. Hello, welcome.
Hello.
People have a lot of generalizations about Dragon Ball versus Dragon Ball Z. People will say, Dragon Ball is about Goku as a kid, Dragon Ball Z is about Goku as an adult, or Dragon Ball, it's martial arts comedy, Dragon Ball Z is where all the epic battles happen, it's where all the explosions and the gore and the violence and the character drama and death happens. And like most generalizations, there are kernels of truth to that. I'm not going to say that is totally wrong. But it's not totally right either. Because again, this was not a series that was ever really intended to be split up, so it's not like there was a hard dividing line in Toriyama's writing where he's all of a sudden, I'm going to make a series that's a next generation type thing, or I'm going to make a series where the tone changes totally abruptly. Because if you look at the last 50 episodes of Dragon Ball, that's where Piccolo shows up. That starts out with the death of a main character. If you want to talk about totally dark, if you want to talk about main characters dying, want to talk about epic battles to save the world, that's a third of that original goofy comedy series. If you want to talk about Goku being an adult, he's an adult for the last 20 so episodes of the original Dragon Ball series. Hello everybody. So while there is definitely some truth to those generalizations, it's kind of one of those things, I have to say though, no matter what you think about, whether it should have been cut or it shouldn't have been split in half, the way it works out, I think, is actually very serendipitously perfect, wouldn't you? I mean, despite the fact, I don't know if the whole tone thing works perfectly, I don't know if the whole Goku as a kid versus Goku as an adult thing works perfectly, but you have to admit, a lot of things do change when Raditz lands. I mean, you have a big 5-year break, which is the longest break ever seen in the series up to that point. You have the introduction of characters like Gohan and Vegeta, arguably 2 of the most important characters in the franchise. I mean, up until then, you go to the original Dragon Ball, you talk about Gohan, you talk about some dead old guy. So, in hindsight, it's amazing how perfect that split works. However, at the time, since again, this was adapting a series that was currently ongoing, they didn't have the benefit of that. They didn't know that Vegeta was going to be a main character. They thought, I mean, for all they knew, he was going to be a villain who stuck around for a little while and died. I mean, hell, that's what Horikawa-san thought. He said that at the panels before. He thought he was just a one-off villain who was going to, die after about 20 episodes rather than stick around for 30 years. So it's amazing how well that works out. But where does the title Dragon Ball Z come from? Surprisingly, it actually comes from Toriyama himself. Because, see, Toei, when they decided they were going to split the series into multiple parts, they came up with some titles of their own. Like, can you imagine just the how timeless and wonderful a title is, like Dragon Ball 90?
I'm glad that didn't happen.
Or just have fun telling your friends, I thought Dragon Ball was okay, but I much prefer that gritty, epic, hardcore action of Dragon Ball, Gohan's Big Adventure.
Gohan's Big Adventure.
Mm-hmm. And so, as you can see, Toei sucked at coming up with a title for this new show. So as they are wont to do when they can't figure it out themselves, they went to Toriyama himself. And so Toriyama has explained in interviews where the name Dragon Ball Z came from. And so at the time, I already really wanted to end the series. And so I made the title Z to say, hey, this is the end!
All right.
Little did he know.
As you can see, Toriyama is not a psychic. Because not only is Dragon Ball not even at the end 30 years later, but the part of the series that is called Dragon Ball Z is about twice as long as the part that came before it. Toriyama also had this to say about the title. Personally, I thought that the title was fine the way it was, but the people on the anime staff said they wanted an image change, so I figured, well, this should be okay. That quote right there is basic Toriyama personality in a nutshell right there. Just, whatever. I'll wing it. So we learned a few things there. One is that, yes, Toriyama did come up with the name Dragon Ball Z. He also didn't use it. I mean, he came up with it, but he gave it to Toei. He never changed the name of his series. He thought the title was fine the way it was. So it wasn't like Toriyama had this big notion, like, oh, the series has changed now, I need to relaunch this, or I need to make a designation that it's totally different now. They just asked him to do it, and he said, okay, here you go. I'm keeping my name the same way it was before, but you guys can do whatever you want, I don't care. So now we know where Z came from, who came up with it, and why he decided to come up with that name, but we still don't know why it was split in the first place. And for a while, I don't think anybody in general really did know. I didn't know about this till maybe a year or so ago. But in order to really get into the heart of where this split came from, we have to dig a little bit deeper past even Toriyama himself, and that's going into the realm of Toriyama's editors. Now, editors is kind of a tricky term because the way it's kind of hard to distinguish between singular and plural in Japanese. So you'll have, when you translate into English, so you'll have things like Viz will translate something where Toriyama will say, oh, my editors made me do this, or my editors thought this, or something like that. The fact of the matter is, Toriyama did have 3 editors over the course of Dragon Ball. However, he never had more than 1 editor at a time. So this image, this is actually from one of the Daizenshuu guidebooks that came out after the series was over. So this is not a picture of his 3 editors sitting around with Toriyama's latest manuscript going, oh, how can we screw this up this week? This is a roundtable discussion they had after Dragon Ball was over. The 3 of them got together to discuss what it was like working with Toriyama. So you have 3 editors. His first editor is a man named Torishima Kazuhiko. Actually, go back to that. Thank you. First is Torishima Kazuhiko, and he was not only Toriyama's first editor during Dragon Ball. Come on in. Ladies and gentlemen, keep them 101.
Keep doing your thing, bro.
So we got this fantasy. Hey guys, I'm so glad you're here. I started a little early at the request of the con guys. All right, so his first editor is the guy on the right. That's Torishima Kazuhiko. And he was not only Toriyama's first editor for Dragon Ball, he was actually basically the man who discovered Toriyama in the first place. When Toriyama had submitted work to Shonen Jump Contest. And he helped guide him. He was his editor through all of Dr. Slump. And he convinced him to do a Kung Fu manga, which led to Dragon Boy, the one-shot predecessor to Dragon Ball. And he remained Toriyama's editor up until around not long after Raditz. Toriyama mentions he has a new editor in the chapter where like Piccolo drops going off in the wilderness. So that's the length of Torishima's direct work with Toriyama. His second editor, the man in the middle, is a man named Kondo Yu. And he took over at about at that same time, the time that Torishima left, and he stayed with Toriyama until about Perfect Cell Games, around that era. And then his final editor for Dragon Ball, the man on the left, is Takeda Fuyuto, who took over towards the end of the Cell arc and continued on through the rest of the series. All right, those are the editors. So, Toriyama had an interesting relationship with his editors. I don't think anything speaks to that more. Speaks more to how Toriyama feels about having criticism of his work than the fact that all three of these men served as inspiration for Toriyama's villains. In fact, Torishima kind of got the worst of this because he was with Toriyama for so long. He not only had a Dragon Ball villain, he had a Dr. Slump villain as well. He was the basis for the mad scientist Dr. Mashirito, with Torishima Mashirito, get it? So some of you guys might have seen Dr. Slump. If you watch Dragon Ball Super, Dr. Mashirito does show up in the Dr. Slump episode of that. That is Torishima. Even the face is kind of similar. It's really kind of eerie. And then later on, Torishima became the inspiration for the great Demon King Piccolo. Kondo, he was the basis for the character of Frieza. And then Takeda, he was the inspiration for Majin Buu. Now, we don't really know too much of the day-to-day influence that Toriyama's editors had on him while he was writing Dragon Ball. We don't know their exact influence, the exact changes they made over the course of those 11 years or so. If anybody knows any one story about Toriyama's editors and how they shaped the direction of Dragon Ball, it is all the brouhaha that happened during the Cell arc. As you know, at this point, Torishima had not been Toriyama's editor for a few years at this point. But if anybody has read the manga version of the beginning of that arc, when Trunks comes from the future and tells Goku about these artificial humans that are coming to destroy the world, he mentions them, specifically who they are. He says number 19 and number 20 are the artificial humans who are in my future wrecking things. And so skip ahead a few chapters, and these two villains show up. Number 19, number 20, we all know who they are. And then all of a sudden Toriyama's phone rings. And it's Torishima on the other line going, "Hey, I'm reading your story. The villains show up. It's just some fat dude and a geezer. What the hell is up with this? This is terrible." And again, this is a man who's not even Toriyama's editor anymore. But, one thing you should learn about Torishima is it seems that when Torishima talks, people listen. And he has had a really fantastic career after leaving Toriyama's side. He's been the editor of V-Jump, editor-in-chief of Shonen Jump, board of directors for Shueisha, the company that publishes Shonen Jump. He was instrumental in putting together the concepts for the video game series Dragon Quest, which also utilized Toriyama for the character designs. Granted, this is also the man who said that Resurrection F had a great story, so guess you can't win them all. But when Torishima talks, people listen. He's a very influential voice, and so whether he was just that influential, or if Toriyama simply trusted his old editor, or if he just realized on his own that it was right, Toriyama changed it. So all of a sudden Trunks comes back from the future. He goes, no, it wasn't these guys, it was number 17 and number 18. Those are the real menaces here. Torishima, phone rings again. It's Torishima on the other end of the line. He goes, "Oh, I saw your new villains. Now just a couple of kids. Fix it." And so then all of a sudden, oh, by the way, they're going to drive away in a van for about a year or so. Now we have Cell. Kondo, not to be outdone, to be able to say, "Hey, I'm the actual editor here now. I can make Toriyama do things too." He goes, "Well, Cell has a stupid face. I don't like it. He can transform, right?" And that's why there's so many changing villains in that arc, is because of the editorial influence and the ex-editorial influence. It's one of those things where you wonder if Torishima had still been Toriyama's editor, if we even would have seen the likes of number 19 and number 20, because he probably would have stopped it before it even got to the page. So that's the kind of power that Torishima had when he wasn't Toriyama's direct superior. Just imagine what he could do when he was. Torishima recently did an interview with Forbes magazine, of all places, which is a really fascinating read. If you haven't checked it out, I really suggest you do. Where he talks in great detail about his history with Dragon Ball, his history with Shonen Jump, his history with Toriyama, just everything. And it is so enlightening. He made no secret of the fact that he did not, at all, like the way the animated adaptation of Dragon Ball was going. He said that the producer on that show was the same as the producer who worked on Dr. Slump. And Torishima feared that as the series was getting darker, with the introduction of characters like Piccolo, that the animated series was not keeping in line with that tone. He thought it still had too much of a Dr. Slumpian atmosphere, if I can turn Dr. Slump into an adjective. So he was very unhappy with that, and he specifically said that once he saw the scene where Goku kills Piccolo, he goes, I knew I couldn't work with this guy anymore. Personally, I don't know, I kind of wish he got into more detail about that, because I thought that scene was handled fairly well. I didn't see any hint of comedy in there. But I think he really wanted to get sort of a tighter leash on how it was being adapted. Now, people always say a lot, when Dragon Ball Kai came out, people would always talk about, I wonder if we could get like a Kai version of Dragon Ball, the original Dragon Ball. And people, most often rebuttal to that was, well, it'd be a lot harder to do a Kai for Dragon Ball, because all the filler content that they cut out, it's much more deeply integrated into the story in that series than it is in Dragon Ball Z. You can't just cut around it. Like in the Piccolo arc, for example, the Cho Shinsui, the Super God Water that Karin gives Goku. In the manga, Karin just walks out with a teapot. Here's your power. Here you go. In the TV series, there's this whole big thing where he sends him to this frozen wasteland and caves, and there's this fake Lieutenant Roshi there who fights him, and then this giant shadow creature tests him and gives him the pot. It's things that you can't. They took a lot more liberties with the show back then. So, for a Dragon Ball Kai made from the Z material, you can just cut around all that extra material. For Dragon Ball, they were kind of doing their own thing with it. So there's a large difference between the Dragon Ball manga, that portion of the series, and the Dragon Ball anime. So Torishima looked around, and are there any Saint Seiya fans in here? Any? Oh yeah, I've never seen Saint Seiya myself, so I get. Oh wait, oh.
It's big in Mexico.
Yeah. All right, so Geekdom is a Saint Seiya fan at least. Hope I won't offend him. I've never seen it before. I don't really know much about it, so I'm just the messenger here.
I only watched 3 episodes.
Was it good?
I'm getting into it.
Yeah.
The manga's better.
Okay, well then you might not like what I'm about to say. Or you might not like what I'm going to say Torishima said. Because Torishima was very impressed with the Saint Seiya animated adaptation. He said that he thought they were doing a great job making a great television series out of a mediocre manga. I'm sorry, I didn't say it, I don't know anything about it, I can't discuss the veracity of that comment. But that's what he thought, that is what he thought. So his idea was to bring some Saint Seiya crew members over to Dragon Ball instead. You can go ahead. And those two men were Koyama Takao and Morishita Kozo. Now, Morishita, he had been the series director on Saint Seiya. And again, I'm not a Saint Seiya expert. These people have told me this, and I trust them, so hopefully this is all correct. He was the series director of Saint Seiya. But apparently he had a problem sort of staying within budget. The work that he had his animators do looked fantastic, but it just wasn't very cost effective. And so he got shunted over into a producer role instead. Koyama, he was the head of series composition on Saint Seiya, which is basically a head writer position. And so he grabbed both of them and moved them over to Dragon Ball. He put Morishita in the planner role, which is above the production supervisor and sort of liaises with all the network and publishing company, which is basically what Torishima wanted, because that means that they have to talk to his company now, where he's the editor of Dragon Ball. They might have more direct influence over how the series is adapted. And Koyama continued on his role as series composition. He'd written some episodes of Dragon Ball prior to coming on board as a main staff member. But the funny thing is, Dragon Ball didn't even have series composition prior to him coming on board. They just had writers. I guess they just did whatever the heck they wanted to. There was no captain steering this ship until Koyama came on board. But they joined the staff of Dragon Ball in episode 133, which was the beginning of the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai arc. And in a sense, these are the two men who would shape the direction of the Dragon Ball animated series for a while to come. So in a sense, the 23rd Budokai is kind of the beginning of Dragon Ball Z in a sense, where the TV series started being adapted a bit more faithfully. Filler was more standalone. Once Z actually started, although Dragon Ball had the two-part titles we joked about earlier, the explaining episode, corresponding sentence to describe what I just said, those things. Every episode of Saint Seiya had that title. Dragon Ball had it on occasion, but Saint Seiya, they went crazy with that. And once Dragon Ball Z started, two-part titles all the time. Dragon Ball Kai has two-part titles. Dragon Ball GT, Dragon Ball Super. Two-part titles are a Dragon Ball staple from here on out. So it has a lot to do with these men. So we have what is thematically the soft relaunch of the Dragon Ball property, with new people in control. But that still doesn't explain where the Z came from. God, this is a really deep rabbit hole we're going into here. Talking about Toriyama, talking about his editors, talking about these guys over here. The answer is ultimately kind of simple, but you just need the backstory and 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 the backstory so it all makes sense. So basically, Koyama's influence, once he became series composition, he is credited for being the writer of all 13 Dragon Ball Z movies as well as handling the series. So if you love Broly, if you hate Broly, if you're indifferent to Broly, however you feel about him, that's him. That's all on him. Okay? Overrated.
Ain't no beers.
Who is?
Broly seems to bring out some really divisive opinions on people. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Koyama's actually spoken about Broly in relation to Beerus.
This is true. He has, because he is no longer working on the Dragon Ball properties, and so he actually wrote a piece about when he went to go see Battle of Gods as an audience member, as a kind of new experience for him. He's been working on Dragon Ball for so long that it was weird for him to go and sit down in this theater just like everybody else and watch a new Dragon Ball movie. And he very pointedly said that Beerus was not the kind of villain that he would have come up with. I guess he could have had like 5 more Broly movies maybe. No, he even said that he felt he kind of wrote himself into a corner with that. But like with each movie, he tried to one-up himself. Like, what's the next strongest thing I can put up there? And he goes, it got to the point where once I made Broly, I didn't know where else I could go from there. So I just kept putting Broly in there. And then before I knew it, it was like 3 times he'd been in there. So yes, they have definitely had their impact on the Dragon Ball franchise. Morishita, for his part, remember when we were talking earlier about those generalizations about the difference between Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, about the alien heritage of Goku in Dragon Ball Z, about the introduction of his son and all those wonderfully kind of serendipitous things that may or may not, actually been what they were looking for. So after Morishita was brought on in the planning role, he went to Toriyama's editor, and he said, look, you're always talking about making the series more popular. So I have an idea about that. What we should do is end the series. If we end the series and then relaunch it with a new name, the network's going to give us more money to advertise it. And that is pretty much it. So everybody who's thinking about the story and the tone and the narrative and it's all so different, it was about the money. It really was it was a marketing ploy, just to shut the series down and come back next week with a brand new name. Have a new paint scheme, have a new theme song, start having 2-part titles all the time, and the rest is kind of history in that sense. But it's really amazing to think about for multiple reasons. One is that I mentioned before that Torishima stepped down as Toriyama's editor not long after Raditz showed up in the manga. which means the TV series has to follow the manga. So it comes out afterwards. It has to see the chapter. It has to write the scripts. It has to animate everything. So they can be months behind. So we get to the freeze arc where they get really, really close to the manga and start stretching things out to a ridiculous point. Otherwise, they're going to catch up. But typically, they like to stay several months behind the television series. So by the time Dragon Ball Z was a thing, Torishima, the man who set all these wheels in motion, wasn't even working with Toriyama anymore, which I think is crazy to think about. And just because this was so serendipitous, because it was just completely based on where they happened to be at that point. You know, Koyama and Morishita were brought in at the beginning of the 23rd Budokai arc. Once they got there, they said, okay, let's change the series. It had nothing to do with what was going on in the story. It was just that's when they happened to be there, and that was the first dividing point in the story where they could break it up logically. They couldn't just be in the middle of a tournament and all of a sudden has a new name on the series. So that was, as soon as the tournament ended, that was their first, they had a little filler arc after that, the wedding dress and all that kind of fun stuff. But once that storyline came to a close, that was the first opportunity to split it in half. So it's like, if Torishima had gotten angry and couldn't work with this guy a little bit earlier, Dragon Ball Z could have started with the tournament. If Torishima had held his tongue and went I don't care, this is a television series, it's not my job. We could have had Dragon Ball Z start with the Frieza arc, or not have a Dragon Ball Z at all. I don't know. I guess it matters if Kondo Yu, when he took over as Toriyama's editor, if he would have had the same inclination, if he would have brought on the same new staff members, if they would have brought up the same idea. And I say that's fascinating just because of just how much that letter Z carries so much weight. People will just look at that. It has so much brand recognition. To some people, the Dragon Ball franchise starts when Raditz lands because it's the Z. It's Dragon Ball Z. We're DBZ. And so just to think that any of this other material could have been put under that umbrella and wasn't, just by chance, just by the miracle of timing. And it makes it seem a little less, I wouldn't say special, but it's just that I think it's something fascinating to think about. Next time you think about how you approach the fandom, how you approach the series, because remember, back to the basics, it is one series. That's what Toriyama wrote, was one series called Dragon Ball, and it just happened to be split at that exact point for no other reason than marketing. So, boy, that was a very cynical answer. Oh my God, this whole panel telling this whole story, this whole interwoven narrative, and it all just comes down to money and marketing. And
didn't that help the series?
it definitely did. Like I said, that Z carries a lot of weight.
So positive.
It is a positive, but I guess it's one of those things where you have to wonder, was it the strength of the content or was it the strength of the Z? It's like, would the series have gotten as popular just on the basis of Raditz showing up, or Vegeta showing up, or Goku changing his hair gold? Would it have mattered what the name was? I mean, Dragon Ball Super's been pretty popular. There's not a Z in that title, so clearly the Dragon Ball brand is strong enough on its own to carry a series. Kai wasn't, yeah, okay, yeah, that's fair.
I think it's the content.
You think it's the content? So you think that if Torishima hadn't gotten involved and they kept it as one series, and then we would still be here in this room talking about Dragon Ball today, we'd still be it wouldn't be in this room because I wouldn't have a panel if you hadn't split it. But we still be a different panel. But we all still be here in this convention center celebrating Dragon Ball, even if there haven't been a Dragon Ball Z? Yeah?
See, I don't know, because I got mad friends
as long
who
as
don't.
the series had kept progressing, I think people would have stayed. It can't stay the same, otherwise you get bored of anything.
I was gonna say I got mad friends. They've never seen the original Dragon Ball, but they see Dragon Ball Z, and they're like, "Yo, I love Dragon Ball Z." And it's like, "Have you seen Dragon Ball?" They're like,
I think that's
"No,
what Bill
man."
Harmon did.
Oh yeah, so I guess here's the next question then, okay? If it hadn't been split, would the pre-Z material be more popular, or would that sort of wacky toilet humor, take people's panties off in the middle of the night stuff drag down its reputation? Yes, sir. Have a safe flight, guys.
Excellent.
I think it could have been. I mean, if it was just Dragon Ball OC and they would have put that on Tsunami, like, I don't know, episode, let's say episode 50, right? People would have been like, oh, what's up with the other 149? And they would maybe check it out. Because there are a lot of long series, especially in Shonen, that are just one name. Like, I mean, One Piece, for example, is super long. So, I mean, I think maybe it could have worked, but...
Well, I guess we can get a real representative sample size here. How many of you in this room have seen the entirety of the first Dragon Ball television series? Ooh. That is more than I expected. You guys are really impressing me. Wait, was that hand up for the show, or was that do you have a question?
Oh, no, I was just saying.
Okay. All right, so we did start a little early, so I did finish a little early as well. I can turn it over to questions if you guys have anything. It could be about the panel, it could be about Dragon Ball dissection, could be why I'm not wearing a dress today.
Why are you wearing a dress?
Well, I don't know. I chose the jacket today, so I look like one of those hip college professors, you know? But I'm neither hip nor a college professor, so I'm just a terrible poser. Yes, sir.
Where did you get, where's your source material? Where'd you get all
Oh, yes, thank you. Sorry. I want to say my thank you.
Please leave quietly, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. But yes, again, I highly recommend that Forbes interview with Tori Shima for that. If you're a Dragon Ball fan and don't follow Kanzenshu.com, make sure you go there. The quotes that I use, the translations.
What website?
Kanzenshu, Kanzenshu. I'm not fluent in Japanese myself. However, that is where I got my translation from. I was going to say thank you to Josh and Megan for getting us set up here with the computer and everything, and thank you to my friend Jake from YBN for answering my same questions, my production questions. Yes, ma'am. Toriyama is notoriously reclusive. He doesn't like going out in the public for the most part. It's rare to even see a picture of Toriyama nowadays. I mean, there is a reason why his avatar, he has a few drawn avatars over the course of it. Like one is the Toribot, everybody knows the Toribot.
Oh yeah.
And then another one is like a cartoony version of him wearing sunglasses and a mask over his face.
Is that what he when he was sick, right? Was that the one he uses?
I think there was one chapter where we did a title page.
Yes.
Did you create a bird character?
I mean, as an avatar for himself? I'm not sure. I'm saying that's not the case, but I'll have one coming to mind. Yes, Mike.
When would you say that the real tone of Z began? For me, whenever I watch Dragon Ball and then Z or read the manga, for me I always feel like the Z began with Piccolo, like Piccolo died out.
I think you said that in your own section.
Yeah, fiction. Because the change in Dragon Ball was so gradual. Because again, it was one series. All these things sort of happened organically. So you can look at elements from other parts of earlier parts, pre-Z parts, and get that same kind of feeling. Piccolo is the most obvious contender, but even in the 22nd Budokai, there's some serious moments. You have a really grisly murder in the Red Ribbon Army arc as well. So there wasn't one dividing cut moment where it's like, oh, this is clearly where the kind of Z mentality begins. It's just little by little it creeps in over the course of a few years. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so my contention with Super is that it became less of a serious contender like Z, because I love Z's, especially the Andro side, but it felt more moving, especially when no, it's not. It's not really a fan, but the future of Trunks, and Trunks' long relationship was very moving. And how he became Super Saiyan was probably one of the most Goku became Super Saiyan. You really feel.
I talk about it in the Trunks TV special where he finds Gohan's body. Spoilers.
The story and tone kind of shifted away when we get to Super, because Super became more. There was no tension to maybe at the end of Super, but still that not in comparison to Z. So is there a reason why Toriyama went back to that more jovial mentality rather than a Z mentality?
I'm not sure if I can answer that completely in depth. The question was what the difference is between Super and Z, why Z is able to capture the kind of emotions and a dramatic weight that Super may or may not be able to capture, depending on how you feel about Super, obviously. I don't want to turn this into too much of a bashing on Dragon Ball Super panel. I did enough of that with Hail Zeon last night, so. My own thought, this is my own speculation, is I think you really are kind of seeing the difference between a solo committed author on a weekly schedule putting together his own story, as opposed to more of a story by committee kind of thing. You know, Toriyama is definitely, we know Toriyama's involved, or was involved in Dragon Ball Super, but he wasn't making it. The TV series of the previous ones, they were adaptations of a story that Toriyama had completely written and drawn himself. That was all his work, editorial interference notwithstanding. But yeah, that was his story. That was his thing. And clearly, people change over decades as well. So even if I think even if we got straight up Toriyama drawing a manga, it still wouldn't feel like that same mid 80s, early 90s kind of feel. Even you take just two different parts of Dragon Ball, which is kind of the fascinating thing about Dragon Ball, is you take a chapter from the Red Ribbon Army arc and take a chapter from the Frieza arc, and you're almost looking at two different types of series. You have focus on different characters. It's one of the things I find fascinating about Dragon Ball is just how people change and grow as the series evolves, which also kind of feel Super might lack a little bit, where it feels kind of stuck in this interregnum time period, so there's not much movement to change and grow. Of course, it's also one of the things that helps that harms new people getting into the franchise, I guess, is just how long and how different it can be. Yes, sir, in the back.
That guy that did most of the movies, is that why they are so totally different and why they have so many plot holes they can't at all within the series? Like they add Saiyans and Trunks is there for no reason.
I would say yes and no. Have you guys all seen the 3 movies attached to the original Dragon Ball series?
Yes.
Totally different direction. There they were just basically doing retellings of the actual story. You can watch those 3 movies sequentially and have like a full story going on there. I introduce people to the franchise sometimes that way because it's a quick 45-minute way of getting people up to speed. The Dragon Ball Z movies and other anime do that too, where they have this sort of non-canon type movies where they just sort of pluck the characters out of the series and just sort of drop them into this plot. It doesn't really matter if it makes any sense, but also it helps people to be up to speed. You don't have to spend a whole lot of time establishing a story, establishing why they're there, how they're there. It's just if you watch the series, you know these characters, they're fighting Cell right now. Here, they're in a movie now.
Right.
And so I think that has something to do with it, where it's just there's going along with that style because it's more accessible. What was I going to say about Koyama? Toriyama has gone on record saying that he felt some of the things that Toei Animation did, especially with the character of Goku, he thought they made him a bit too superhero-y, a bit too righteous. He brings a bird back to life at one point, stuff like that.
That was awesome. That was awesome.
So, whether you agree with that or not, that's what Toriyama feels. So he believes that there is definitely a difference between the way he writes Goku and how Koyama wrote Goku. Yes.
That's cool.
I'm sure. I think you were next, perhaps.
I guess. So do you feel like a lot of the, the tonal difference with Z being very serious and very emotional versus Super kind of being I guess you can say a bit more basic? Do you think a lot of it has to do with time slot differences as far as what time the show actually comes on in Japan and what audience they're trying to target and kind of keep nailed down on the show?
You said Super versus Dragon Ball Z?
Yeah, the time slot that Super runs at, I believe it's a morning time, Saturday morning type of thing in Japan.
As far as I understand, that does have a lot to do with it. I think it's also sort of shifting cultural norms as well. But I mean, whether you like Kai or you don't like Kai, even that series, which was in the same time slot that Super was occupying, You'd see violence toned down, where it's like instead of a giant bloody hole in Goku or Vegeta, it's just like a bruise or something, So, but even then, there were instances in the manga where it was bloodier and gorier than the TV series was. Like, for example, does anybody remember when Nappa cuts Ten Shihan's arm off?
Oh yeah.
There's like a quick shot where it's like this sort of weird photographic negative effect, and there's like sort of like weird yellowish kind of blood coming out. But after that, it's pretty clean. After that, you have a little bit of like residual blood on the sides. In the manga, that thing is just gushing blood for like the next chapter or so until he dies. So there are definitely points.
Yamcha's like death when he in 19 like struck his hand to him.
Mm-hmm.
Was that exposed a lot in the manga compared to the anime?
Actually, that was pretty similar as far as I can remember. It was, I mean, they were both really gory. I mean, the TV series definitely had some more close-up shots where, like, you see like the blood dripping off the hand, things like that. So.
You hear his ribs breaking as he's going.
Wait, they're turning out really bloody or two when Phil rips off his arm. That's like probably the most bloodiest thing in the whole series.
Yeah. You had a question?
Yeah, just thinking of movies, since we, there's no super preliminary right now. What do you think, what's going to happen with this new movie now that's coming out now?
Oh, that's a good question to ask me because I was at AJ's panel yesterday.
Yeah.
That was the first time I'd seen any of the trailer for that movie at all.
Okay.
I don't know if it's just trying to avoid spoilers or if it's just too busy with my own Dragon Ball series or catching up with Super or whatever. I just haven't seen it yet. So I do have a lot of I like I've seen the promotional drawing and I do like the new art style they're going in that direction. So
yeah, that's good.
So hopefully it'll be great. I admit Super's kind of has me a little bit burned out right now. But if it does continue, or if Dragon Ball continues in some capacity, I certainly hope it's good.
It'll be back.
I mean, what I'm liking is that at least it seems like they've planned this for a while. So it's not just like something they're just doing all of a sudden.
Yeah.
So apparently it's been like rolling around in his head for a year. So.
I mean, I've read the interview about S cells and all that fun stuff. And I admit that leaves me a little bit dubious, but I try not to pass judgment on anything until I see.
That was a fan theory for years.
S cells?
Yeah.
Like they call it S cells?
They didn't call it S cells.
Because that's been pretty impressive.
But it was pretty much the same thing.
Yeah.
I heard of it.
Medical organs.
No. Like legit theory. And
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's also not that hard to come up with the name S cells anyway. It's kind of a simple name. All right, have I missed anybody? Yes. Oh, sorry. Oh, did I miss a hand?
No, I was just stretching.
Okay.
To touch back on the point that you made previously about Goku being more self-righteous than a superhero, do you think that was done for more marketing purposes to appeal to a wider audience?
I try not to second guess what the creative mindset is too much, but my thought is that if you hand any two people a scenario or a group of characters, and even if you have because most television shows have what they call a writer's Bible, where they have a list of the characters and they give them all their attributes and their backstory, things like that. You're still going to have people interpreting that same information differently. So unless something is really, really crazy far off the mark, like a Dragon Ball Evolution Goku. It is a pretty big leap into nerdy high school students who wipes his head along the tops of cars.
Starts flying into people's mouths.
But I would say Koyama's changes are probably a little more subtle than if you weren't really looking too deeply into Goku's character. You might not even really notice that there's a huge difference. I think it's more of a matter of degrees in that case. It's not like he's completely far off the mark. He just emphasizes qualities in a different way than Toriyama does. That's the way I see it at any rate.
Didn't Toriyama say that he had issues with that?
He had issues with the way Koyama wrote him?
The whole superhero aspect of how
yes.
the show
Yes.
was. Yeah.
In fact, I recently did a Dragon Ball dissection episode that was all about my interpretation of Goku's character and how that goes in with, how that ties in with, I only have a couple minutes, actually I have now, but, so I wish I could answer that in detail. I would recommend you checking the video out. I hate having to plug myself like that in the panel. I have time for one more question. Yes, sir.
besides Z, do you feel that Takayama and Morishita's inclusion was a good thing for the filler and all that? In Z.
Yes and no. I think it's a nuanced question. I like a lot of what they brought to the table, but I also can't deny that I kind of like the more integrated filler of the first Dragon Ball. I like when they took liberties, and wherever you can lay the blame for it, you have to admit the pacing of Dragon Ball Z around the late Frieza into the Cell arcs can get kind of atrocious. And sometimes I wonder that if they had, more liberty to do what they wanted to do, to sort of take it in their own direction like they had with the first series, or they seemingly have with the first series, to make their own filler and to change plot points as they saw fit, that maybe it could have been not truer to the manga, but maybe a better paced experience. But I don't know, I wasn't there.
Yeah.
All right, thank you all so very, very much for coming to this time today. Hope you all enjoyed the rest of Kameha time.
That was great. Thank you.
That was like the most cuddly panel. I was
Actually, I was kind of hoping this would